My name is Jerm. This is Jerm Warfare, the battle of ideas. It's still winter here, but we have had 30-degree days over the last few days. And apparently, according to Angus, who I spoke to a few days ago, we've had low rainfall this July. Conversely, what's it like on your side?
Well, Mike and I are in different places, so we are having different things going on. But it's been, in the south, England is hot and dry. But I think that's what's meant to happen in summer. I can certainly remember it happening before, and it does, which is not to dismiss it.
No, that's the point, though. That's what I'm getting at.
Yes. I mean, straight away, for me, what it does is to ask the question, what do people expect? And when I say what do they expect, I mean, what do they expect insofar as food is concerned? Because we are constantly told that this is a problem for farmers. I accept that. I absolutely accept it's a problem for farmers. It is a problem for farmers because they are farming in such a way that means that they are needing particular conditions to be able to suit not so much the quality of whatever it is they're producing, but the industrial requirements to produce something at a certain time, to a certain volume, certain weight. I mean, the quality does come into it, but not the right type of quality, and not quality concerning nutrient density, which is something I'm sure Angus will have mentioned. I haven't actually listened to all of that interview yet, but I really look forward to it. So this is the drama. The thing is that is unfair to an extent, because if you're not trying to sort of coerce nature into doing something it wasn't planning on doing, in that you might be grazing livestock, then it can absolutely put you in a very, very difficult position, because you have to manage what's going to happen over the winter. And that is a significant problem. And as an indication, last year, which was also very dry, but drier from a much earlier period in the UK. So it basically stopped raining in about February 2025. That meant that there was no spring grass growth, and that meant that in a lot of parts of the country, the hay cut, or any kind of haylage or silage cut for winter feed for livestock, was nil. And the bit of ground that I was cutting hay from yielded only 10% of the previous year's crop. That does put you in a very, very difficult position. But as to the rest of it, look at what we waste. I know I bang on about this, but I feel it is one of the things that people really do have to sort of listen about, and just think about. Do we really need this much stuff everywhere, especially food, and the same thing all the time? So anyway, I could go on.
So the reason why actually I was bringing it up is I was kind of pushing towards a bit of a climate discussion. You're right. It's localized, and that's my point. Only here in Cape Town has our rainfall been lowish. Last year it was fine. In Johannesburg, it's perfect. It's very, very wet as usual. It rains just about every single day, as expected. I mean, that's the point that I'm trying to make. But what happens now is any kind of change that seems slightly out of what people might expect is now suddenly man-made, and this is what we find now becoming. It's a strange discussion. El Nino is supposedly coming our way later this year. I don't know if it's heading your way, but we're going to supposedly have a very, very hot summer, very dry summer for an extended period of time. And now what happens is, if you go online, this is all man-made stuff, and it's because of we're driving ice cars and it's back to that old narrative again from 15 years ago.
Yeah, but
I don't know how to deal with it.
Yeah. Well, it's a gigantic propaganda and brainwashing exercise, because that's exactly why I asked the question, what do people expect? And people have been led to expect the same thing every time. Well, that's totally ludicrous. And forever and ever, since anyone's been keeping any records of anything, there have been those standout years, the Little Ice Age, all the stories from markets on the Thames when it froze over in London, the incredible snowfalls that happened in the 1960s. I think was it 67? I think it was 1952 and 1967. Obviously, I absolutely stand to be corrected if I've got those dates wrong, but I can remember seeing photographs from where I was living sort of 15 years ago from that big snowfall in the 70s. And there's an incredible picture of drifting snow with just probably 18 inches of a telegraph pole sticking out from the top of it. I mean, that is a wooden telegraph pole in the UK is what, I don't know, 50 foot high. And that was all that was visible. So that does not happen every year. That had never happened every year. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. We don't really know exactly why, but to constantly point towards one thing that is apparently controlling everything else, and by that I mean human activity, there's complete deficiency of logic, to my mind.
Sorry, Mike, we killed you.
Jerm, I think I'm going to be controversial here and say the English in particular are absolute snowflakes when it comes to the weather. It has to be said. They complain if it rains in the summer. They complain if it's sunny in the summer. They complain if it's cold in the winter and if it's warm in the winter. I mean, the weather is without question one of the biggest talking points that the average English person has, and they're never happy with it. And, at the same time that one of the reasons that they would have justification in not being happy with this year is quite a number of people have probably spent thousands of pounds on foreign holidays to get exactly the kind of weather that we're getting here at the moment, right? So, but the media's part in it is a very big part in this, because what does the media do? It makes the normal seem abnormal. Mm-hmm. So for two examples, water shortages. Why do we have water shortages in this country? Is it because the average temperature has gone up, or the rainfall on average over a period of years has gone down? Well, no. The reason we have water shortages in this country is because we've increased the population by whatever, 20, 30%, whatever it is, and not built a single reservoir in the last 40 years, right? So that's one reason that we've got water shortages.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really, yeah. Another reason that another issue is wildfires, because obviously we're getting big headlines this year about wildfires kicking off everywhere, as if wildfires have never happened before. Now, let's just set aside the possibility that some of these wildfires have been intentionally started. What's never discussed is the change in land management practices that have happened in the last, well, Charles could tell me better than I can, but let's say 40 years. And as we move towards this net zero driven rewilding of everything, and we don't manage our forest land in the way that we have in the past, or our scrub land, or whatever it happens to be, and we allow more scrub to just be there, then of course, if a fire begins, it absolutely becomes a bigger issue than it may have done in the past. So none of this context is ever given, either the reservoirs context or the land management practice context, and instead everything that's going on is framed within anthropogenic climate change, and it's the other aspect of it as well is, of course, they talk about changes in climate in periods of decades, when changes in climate is something that happens over periods of centuries, if not millennia. So, it's completely ridiculous to suggest that because in living memory we can't remember having, in fact, for a significant proportion of the British population, we can remember a summer like this before 1976 being the obvious choice. But nonetheless, they talk about, seasonal changes happening within living memory, when at the same time they're talking about climate, when climate cycles are much broader than that. Again, completely misrepresenting the situation and leading people to a conclusion which is not valid. So, a number of issues there, but we need to recognize when we, again, are being played.
So I can tell you with absolute certainty that there will be pushback to what you're saying there, because ultimately our discussion here is, okay, it's much ado about nothing. This is typically how the weather works. Now, that there will be those who will say, but hold on a second, all these airplane, let's not go down that road, but all these trails, they dissipate and they make the sky more gray. And I think that is true. There's no doubt that causes all sorts of other issues, but that is localized. And this is the big thing that people seem to think. What happens where you live doesn't affect me. It's too far away. And what happens again is that they see the world as an incredibly small place. The fires that are happening in California or in Europe, they could be man-made fires, and that could be arson or whatever, and it could be legitimately dangerous and very, very catastrophic. But it doesn't have any effect on me. Almost negligible effect, because the world is actually so big. And so therefore the conversation around localization becomes very, very important. And it's a matter of perspective, isn't it?
Yeah. But sorry, Charles, I was just going to say that, okay, I take your point, Jerm, but the fact of the matter is, come your summer in South Africa, I guarantee you're going to get exactly the same types of headlines that we've been getting in the UK this summer and in Europe this summer. So again,
hottest summer ever.
Right. That kind of thing. And so, in a sense, everything that happens in Europe, you say it doesn't affect you, but actually it does affect you, because all those headlines that we're seeing in Europe at the moment will feed into the headlines that you get in your summer, and you're going to get, as we saw in France or as we saw in the UK, the same thing's happening here, and
it's the
again, without any of the context. Yes.
Yeah, it's the propaganda war, not the actual weather.
Yes, although, I mean, there are just two issues. I totally agree with you about the effects that are felt in particular places and not so much in others. Although, actually, I would say that I think we can be a little bit blasé about that. I don't know a huge amount about how that works in the sky, but one does have the feeling that that above the atmosphere, stuff does stay in situ for an awfully long time. And so therefore, in fact, there will be a cumulative effect even in places that it's not yet visible, which I think that is absolutely reason for concern. I think also the oceans are another area in which I think it's very easy to assume that just because you might be somewhere where there isn't a great deal of shipping traffic or local pollution or whatever, that the situation is okay. And in actual fact, it's okay, the science. But I think this is not such a contentious area. Examining fish stocks and the buildup of microplastics in fish and that kind of thing, in actual fact, does suggest that this is a much bigger problem, or at least that it does travel. So I know what you mean, but I think that that does rather obscure the point about pollution. But you see, this again is a totally ridiculous issue, because people have been conditioned and instructed that they must only focus on carbon dioxide, which of course is a giver of life. It means that everything else just gets a free pass. Actual pollution, no one really cares about anymore. Actual degradation of the environment, that doesn't really get a look in. And what I would say is that whilst the idea of anthropogenic climate change on a grand scale doesn't stack up, the microclimate change absolutely does. And if you think of the places that this sort of stuff is reported from, well, how many of those cities in particular have had swathes of their parks and trees destroyed in the last, 50 years? Because anywhere that does have a well-established ecosystem of, in particular, trees, but soil that's sort of behaving itself, will be able to regulate its climate, its own microclimate, not just in summer, but also in winter. And I think that's something that's forgotten about completely. And that exists also in the countryside. And I know I've talked about this before, the ability of soil to look after itself, to regulate its own temperature according to its condition, is basically totally lost by the industrialization of farming. It strips out all those microorganisms that are able to do that. So there absolutely is an effect that can be demonstrated where it does appear to be hotter than before, and there are reasons for that. And I think the problem is that this debate, if one can call it that, has become so absurdly binary that that the really important points are totally lost, and no one really has any idea what's going on, apart from knowing that they should feel very passionately one thing or the other thing. And of course, the other absurdity that's never really pointed to is that, any graph that you pull out of the United Kingdom government statistics drawer will tell you how brilliantly we've done. We've reduced our carbon emissions by this, that, and the other. Okay, well, what's the difference then? What change has that made? If you're going to say on the one hand that you can make your graph from 1880 go up like that, then if we've dropped like that since 1990, then what's the change? So why are we pursuing this? If you're saying that there is a short-term effect to man's activities, and then in the same breath, in effect, saying that there isn't, well, how does that help anyone's argument?
Do you think people around us actually believe this stuff, though? Because I've often wondered if we are being fed a perception that isn't actually real. I don't know anybody in my circles, and maybe it's just my circles, but whenever I speak about any of the stuff, nobody actually buys into the mainstream narrative. I'm yet to find. Sorry, go on.
No, I was going to say I think that's absolutely right. There are many fewer people actually accept the argument than is implied by the fact. For example, I mean, if there was a majority of people that actually bought the argument, we wouldn't see things like the BBC taking a decision that when it comes to climate change discussions, that actually there's no requirement to have a balanced discussion about it, and that they should not, they have taken the active decision never to give anyone a platform on the BBC that has any kind of what they would call denialist motivation or narratives. So they clearly don't want to have a debate. Now, why would they not want to have a debate? Because if the argument that was being made was being accepted by people on a broad scale, then they wouldn't be afraid of anybody challenging that in any way. But they clearly are afraid of that because because they simply won't give those people a voice. But and so as a result, but I mean, we see in people's behaviors that they're not buying it because they're not. Okay, some people buy EVs because they think that by buying an EV, they're somehow helping the planet. They generally think that without having done
very few
any research to see what effect, according to the according to the climate change narrative, what effect does the building of an EV have on that? How much carbon dioxide is released through the building of how many other chemical reactions are there that cause various kinds of climate-related issues when you've bought that final product, because the manufacturing of EVs, the manufacturing of solar panels, and the manufacturing of wind turbines is generally ignored in the discussion.
I mean, I don't think
you
people
will always
actually
have a
believe
small
that,
proportion
though.
of people that are buying those kinds of products, but the vast majority of people just want to continue driving their internal combustion engines.
Or if they do buy EVs, and this is from the circles that I find myself in, if they do buy EVs, it's because they can save on petrol because they just plug their car in at home, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. And also because EVs are very fast and some of them like a bit of speed. But the conversations are never really about saving Earth.
Yeah, I think that's it. I mean, I think people just need to be honest about stuff. And I don't know. I mean, I can't substantiate this as anything other than conversations that I've had personally and sort of anecdotally. But the whole the climate change thing just seems like one gigantic virtue signal, and it is, because it's been propagandized to such an extent. It is pretty heavy weather if you're going to take a public stance of considering that you think it's rubbish. So far easier to just make out that you go along with it. And I mean, there will be a few people, I suppose, who've bought electronic vehicles that do genuinely believe that they're making a difference, and that outweighs the cost implications, because I'm still not quite sure what the market's like, but my understanding of it is that to buy an EV is extraordinarily expensive, especially since you don't really know how much life you're going to get out of it, or what sort of a value is going to be placed on it when it's coming up for, if you're going to sell it on.
Yes.
Well, just because of the battery issue. Yeah, go on.
Sorry, but just, I mean, I've had this conversation now over and over, because when I bought my car recently, I did test drive a few EVs simply because, if I'm not going to be doing a lot of far driving, it does make a lot of sense to plug it in the garage. But they don't tell you about the expenses of setting that up. If you want to set up that charging station in your garage, you can use a normal plug, which is quite slow, or you can use what they supply, but then you have to install three-phase electricity. We don't have that. I don't know if that's normal in the UK, but it's not really normal here. So it's a very specific kind of wiring that costs a lot of money. And then ultimately, how long does that battery last, and how many charges can you actually do? And nobody really actually knows the cost benefit of these things. And
yeah,
how many mechanics know how to work on these vehicles either? So I just go back to internal combustion, and it's been around for long enough, and I don't really care too much about the CO2 stuff, because I don't buy into that narrative.
Well, look, I'm going to say, Jerm, the couple of visits to China that I've done now absolutely converted me. If you're living in a city, there is no question that everybody driving electric vehicles is a much more pleasant experience all round, just from the noise aspect alone.
Yeah, I saw that in Shanghai.
But as you say, if you're having to do some distance driving, then that's not going to work. But the other thing that hasn't been really addressed yet is the cost of disposal, and what I suspect is that the companies that are producing electric vehicles at the moment are going to do everything that they can to avoid the cost of disposal, because none of the batteries, as far as I know, are in any way recyclable. So it's going to be pretty expensive to deal with that. Who's going to deal with it? I suspect it's going to be the taxpayer at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting one. The other issue is loads of other issues, insurance premiums, because even the slightest damage, and I think I might be right in saying not even to the battery itself, but to the housing, to anything near the battery, means that as far as the insurers are concerned, that's a write-off. So obviously you could therefore buy a battery, a new one yourself, but the cost of doing so would be prohibitive. So I think there are there are massive issues there. But of course, the other the sort of the mega issue is well, yeah, okay. So what if everybody goes and buys one? Then we have no electricity left. So it's this idea of constantly sort of chasing the rainbow, and it's just it is absolutely daft. It doesn't make any sense. But the other thing, what I was going to say was that here, I think having been convinced by peer pressure and then incentivized by certain government schemes, let's say, the conditions were made a bit more favorable, but also that was done at a time where the price of electricity per unit was considerably lower, say, per mile than it would have been to buy petrol or diesel. Now, obviously, petrol and diesel have gone up in the United Kingdom significantly since the end of February with the let's say Israel situation. I was going to say Iran, but that's rather unfair on Iran. So that's happened, but also there've been enormous increases in the price of electricity. So I'm not sure how it does stack up now. The last time I did a calculation, which was fag packet, admittedly, but in fact there was very little difference, and I think even per mile it might have been more expensive at that particular moment to be bashing out electric miles than combustion engine ones. So there are very few reasons to go for it, but I would absolutely agree with you. I've only driven a handful of them, but they're very good. Although I do have to say, to the manufacturers of the whatever the Nissan car is, the little Nissan one.
Leaf.
I mean, Leaf, that's it. It's amazing. It has a little, where you would expect to have a gear stick, it has a little sort of nubbin, which you can only go forward or backwards. And if you push the thing forwards, the car goes backwards, and if you push the thing backwards, the car goes forwards. I would love to have been in the meeting where they decided which way to make the car go when you push the thing one way or the other. I mean, that is a massive stitch up for the driver. But yeah, they're very they're very zippy. I can see if you lived in an urban area, there's a whole load of ifs, and if you had access to, I don't know if they require 3-phase here, whatever it is they charge off. If all those conditions were set and you didn't have cables going all the way across the street and it was sort of practically usable, then yeah, of course I can see the appeal, but don't pretend that that's going to stop us from having hot summers, because it's not.
Yeah, but just on the actual pragmatism of the EVs, Mike, I agree with you. I mean, I've said this before a few times. In the center of Shanghai, where it's a hustle and bustle kind of city, and it's very quiet. You can hear the bicycles and the birds because there are so many electric vehicles. That is an anomaly. It's very, very different. And also China, by the way, as a whole is an anomaly, how they get that right, because they don't have electricity problems. However, we do. and I can't see us doing terribly well with charging, particularly with our history of rolling blackouts. I will say that the last year has been quite good in terms of electricity reliability, but we are notoriously unreliable because, like you were saying, Mike, the UK hasn't built any reservoirs. Well, we haven't really built any power stations. We kind of have, but it's been a lot of corruption and they're not really working properly, and it hasn't been a flowing process, that's for sure. So we are constantly overburdened with electrical demand, and now they expect us to plug in vehicles everywhere. It's not.
Yeah, but Jerm, the other reason that that this becomes an even bigger issue. Okay, you have South Africa has its own power supply issues. In the UK, we don't today, but tomorrow, after the next 50 data centers have had their planning permission approved and they've been built, we're going to have, because we're also not building. Okay, we're building solar farms and we're building wind turbine farms, but those are being used to replace gas turbine power stations. and I think they've pretty much decided to extend the life of the current nuclear fleet in the UK at the moment. But nonetheless, we're not expanding our energy production in this country, but we are destroying our planning processes in order to make room for more and more data centers across the country, because AI is the next big thing. So there's demands on the electricity supply going to come from the AI companies, and they are going to get priority. Perhaps hospitals are going to maintain some kind of priority that they have at the moment for guaranteed supply, which means that since we're not building anything, it's going to be the householder that experiences the outages. And I think that's the direction of travel, is that's an inevitability. And so, again, your electric car is probably going to be, if you have one, is going to be one of the main problems there.
Well, I mean, here also, Charles, you'll know because you've been onto the African continent, but having a normal car that sits low on the road and all that kind of thing generally doesn't work well with our kind of terrain. We have a lot of gravel roads and a lot of potholes and all that kind of stuff. So having a bigger vehicle also makes more sense. And if you drive further, and we have long distances that we drive, and so EV just doesn't really cut it if you don't have charging stations everywhere either. So I just don't see the long-term benefit, other than if it's, as you said earlier, Charles, in the city center and it's nippy and you want to get around. But they do have a lot of power. There's no doubt about that. I mean, I test drove one Chinese EV here, and did like 0 to 100 kilometers in, I think, like 4 seconds. It's very, very quick.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is it. The practical delivery of this as a mass product, mass consumed product is miles off. It's ridiculous. I mean, let's face it. The thing is, in the great push to sort of go green, one thing the United Kingdom has still not sorted out is the bicycle, which has been pretty green for a long time. You do puff a bit when you're riding one, but it
got to sort the weather out first.
Well, there we go. But it was a very, very straightforward proposition, which was that people who were either in or near towns, or basically near any kind of transport hub, would ride a bicycle and then take public transport. But instead, public transport has been absolutely made to not work, as in bus and trains slightly less so, but bus connections seem intentionally designed in order that you cannot get from A to C, because your time of arrival at B will be just after the transport from B to C has left. So that's dead in the water. There are no real provisions for bicycles in terms of actually parking a bike anywhere. Okay, there are a few exceptions to this, but not very many. So I mean, it's completely pathetic, and that is something. I mean, think of the number of birds that could have been killed with that particular stone. If people had genuinely got onto bicycles, you could have completely regenerated and overhauled the public transport system. You could have got people fit. You could have got people out. You could have got cars off the road. There's so many things that, as well as rejuvenating the bicycle industry. But instead, no. The only thing they've really done with sort of the push for British Olympic cycling is just get more people in Lycra, not actually going anywhere, and that's that. So that there are, I think, a lot of really, really open goals, but that's to assume good intent on those who, in effect, hold some of the levers, and I don't think we can assume good intent.
Hold on, Charles, what is the general terrain like in the UK? Is it quite mountainous and hilly, or is it fairly flat?
Yeah, there's no general. I mean, that's as perverse as it sounds, because obviously it's a small landmass. Mike's quite right to point out that the English do talk an awful lot about the weather, especially to complain about the weather, and really just, I mean, I don't know why people cannot deal with what is being
hang on. Let me
described as extremely.
Sorry. Let me jump in and just rephrase what I was asking. So, if you go to the Netherlands, it's very flat.
I get
so
it.
You don't really have any issues riding a bicycle.
Yeah, but it's all part of the fun. The parts of Eastern England, East Anglia, the sort of bulge that pokes out northeast of London is flat, by and large flat. There are other parts of the country that are flattish, but no, I mean, much of it is either gently undulating or hilly. It's great biking country. So it's not, I mean, there are some places where it would be quite difficult to ride a bike, but the problem is now, I think the imbalance, because car ownership and the population and all that sort of thing, biking along some roads now is not nearly so much fun as it would have been, because there are not just more cars, but also this obsession with a car being massive, or at least massive on the outside, complete waste of space, because it's all padding and poor design, as far as I can work out. You get a car that's sort of 30 or 40 years old, it will almost always have more space in it than its current version, even though the current version is much bigger on the outside, which is partly stylistic, partly supposedly to do with safety.
That's a good point, actually, Charles. I've never thought about that. The older cars having more space inside.
Yeah. There we go. Especially for the driver, who is assumed by some weird quirk of I don't know what to have got shorter over the years. So trying to sit up in a modern car, if you're the driver and you're over a certain height, is again quite challenging. Why has that happened?
That's so interesting. I wonder if there's an interesting talking point. The size of cars. If I think about it, it makes sense. When my dad was young, I mean, obviously I wasn't around, but from the conversations and the photographs, he had a huge car, and it wasn't a big car. It was just a car, but it was huge. If that makes sense, like a Cadillac or something.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, for me, it's just another thing that's taken a massive nosedive. It's like architecture, car design, inside and out, has gone to the dogs. If only it had gone to the dogs, I'm sure they would have come up with better designs. But it's terrible. I think it's a real shame, because there was absolutely a period where I accept that performance and fuel economy and all those sorts of things might not have satisfied our desires of today, but to look at a car from up to, let's say, the 1990s, they were by and large, I think, objectively things of beauty. They had an aesthetic value which cars now absolutely do not have, and there is partly it's to do with companies having subsumed others, but there is you can spot now, if you think about it, you can spot, I would say in most cases, an EV just by the shape of the car. They've picked this sort of homogenized design that's supposed to suggest, I don't know what is it supposed to suggest, but they are by and large electric. They're all the same. It's very, very boring. I know this is going back to our discussions on creativity, but it's so important. It's so significant, and it just goes to show how much people have changed insofar as they're able to do anything for themselves or think for themselves. Because going back some years, the onus was on you. If you got into a car and you wanted to go and drive, you were responsible for making sure that you didn't end up in the ditch and either injure yourself or worse, somebody else. And now you get in the car, and it's as though it's the car's job to do that. And I know I'm teeing Mike up for a rant here, but either the car will have stuff that's supposed to protect you, or it will tell you what to do and supposedly drive you. So it says a lot about the world we live in, I think.
I wonder if that does make us useless eaters. What's the word? Over safety of the vehicles. My car is very, very, very safe and secure, and I hate it. And I've turned off as many of those features as possible. If, for example, you can't go anywhere close to the lines because then the car moans and the steering wheel pulls you back in and all that kind of stuff. I find it remarkably annoying, and it actually makes me exhausted. I just want to turn off all that stuff, which I've done. And my wife actually said she wonders if all of these safety features, which are obviously a part of the bureaucratic process, because I don't think the car manufacturers would voluntarily include all of these things by default. She was wondering if it actually adds to the dumbing down of society.
There's no doubt about it. I mean, are you sure you want to take the lid off this Pandora's box?
100%. But I mean, I
have very, very, very little experience of this, except for one particular one particular time that I happened to rent a car that had all these driver's aids, and because it was a rental car, I couldn't switch this stuff off easily. And certainly every time you restarted the engine again, it was back to square one. And I find the lane assist, I mean, I kind of understand why they thought that was a good idea, because, people do from time to time fall asleep at the wheel and have ended up killing themselves. But you've got to ask, is the level of incidence of that sufficient to require this type of intervention? And so what happens when someone who is used to driving with lane assist, what happens when they get into a car that doesn't have it? I suspect some bad things happen at that point. And so it absolutely contributes, in my opinion, to dumbing people down. And also the idea of removing responsibility. So, at what point does it get to the stage where someone can legitimately go into a court and say, "Not my fault, Gov. It was the car that did it."
Sure.
If they've killed a pedestrian or something, it's still not clear. And of course, a lot of these discussions are being had around the rise of the driverless car, and we're starting to see driverless taxis being rolled out in London and other cities around the world. So, at what point do we therefore, or whose responsibility is are certain events going to have? Where's that responsibility going to lie? Sorry, but the other sort of big question is there any? And I'm don't know anything other than sort of Northern Ireland driving statistics, because it's just something that I was aware of as I was growing up. But I haven't seen any particular evidence to suggest that the number of fatalities on the roads has actually fallen as a result of all these driver aids. And is that because people are, as a rule, switching them all off, or is it because they actually make no difference?
Sure, that is a Pandora's box.
Will be told that the reason that hasn't changed is because not enough people have them in their cars, and therefore we have to do away with all the cars that don't have them, in order that that everybody is stuck into a vehicle that can be monitored and controlled remotely and geofenced and all that stuff. But no, I mean, I totally agree with you. But we're back to we're just straight back to everyone's a terrorist. It's just the blanket cast over everybody. You turn up to an airport, and of course you could be a terrorist. Get into a car, and of course you could be completely unable to drive it, despite the fact you've passed a driving test, which is supposed to certify that you are capable of managing that vehicle. It is completely extraordinary that's the world we live in, where these are not. I mean, these should have been sold. Imagine the money that the manufacturers could have made. You could have bought for an additional £500. You get your lane assist or your winking wing mirrors or whatever it is. People would have bought that stuff without it being imposed. It should absolutely not be it's something that you cannot disable, cannot remove from a car.
Well, that's why I said it's part of the bureaucratic red tape. I think that stuff is by design, and it makes everything more expensive. Because imagine how much cheaper the vehicle could be if you just removed all of that stuff. You don't need like my car. What's so frustrating is every time I stop the car and I open the door, loud through the speakers it says, "Please take your cell phone with you." And I keep turning it off, but if you leave the car off long enough, then it kind of resets and then it turns back on again. And I'm driving one day on the highway and suddenly it says, "Please slow down." I hate these things. and everywhere I find in the options to turn all these things off, I'm thinking to myself, why go through so much effort to add all these things in? I almost think that these things are more of a hindrance than they are a safety feature. And then
they are, but it's being driven by the European Union. That's where this all began.
How many years ago?
It's hard to say off the top of my head because time is, COVID was 6 years ago. Now time has sort of become something that I have no particular relationship with anymore.
I think the EU are probably leading in terms of the...
Yeah, they are. They absolutely are, yeah.
In terms of that sort of bureaucratic mess.
And car manufacturers, if they have to, introduce some kind of facility for one major market, they're just going to roll that out. They're just going to, they don't ever create a version for a particular market, and so you start to see these regulations spread at that point.
I wanted to say earlier, you were talking about the data centers popping up. We now here in Cape Town have a huge data center that's now begun development right next to our international airport. And it's a complete and utter, it's a disaster because it's a wetland. The whole area where the airport was built was not supposed to have stuff being built around it. It's green and has birds and all kinds of beautiful things. Now they're going into that because they need the space. And so it's causing all sorts of controversy. A data center.
But it's worse than that, Jerm, because we talked about data centers and electricity earlier, but of course what we didn't talk about was data centers and water.
Yes.
And so, what they're already finding in the United States, which is ahead of the game on these new bills, is water's being pulled out of the municipal water supply. And then it's being pumped untreated back into the municipal water supply, and it's being left to the municipality to deal with pollution. And so people are the municipality is not geared up for dealing with the kind of pollution that they are pumping out. So people are now starting to see health effects as a result of water not being cleaned properly and ending up back in their taps. So, this is not a good direction to be going in, and data centers are going to be a gift that keeps on giving, in the sense that they are going to be facilitating the entire surveillance infrastructure that we all think is not a good idea, and they're also going to be pushing more and more people ultimately into the health system.
I wonder now if it's possible to push back. I mean, we sit here and we talk about it, and it just goes ahead anyway. I don't know what the answer to that is, but I mean, you can moan as much as you want. They will still seem to forge ahead with it. What do? You have to, I suppose, go to your local council, I guess, where it starts. But a lot of the stuff is also private companies, so they'll say, "Well, it's not us." You got to go to those companies.
Well, no, I don't think that's necessarily right. I mean, the data center that's proposed for North Devon already has half a dozen campaign groups established, and so these are getting some major pushback. And so long as we've mentioned the Ian Crane's anti-fracking campaign, in other programs, so long as we see these, whatever opposition there is to these things being done at a local level, then I think there's a good opportunity for successfully batting these off. But it's going to require, just as the fight against the fracking industry in the UK required, it's going to require local people getting up out of their sofas and going or maybe pulling their sofas and their televisions out of their living room and going and sticking them on the entrances to the development site and blocking the lorries bringing the concrete in. I mean, that's what it's going to require. But it's been done before in this country, and I think it could be done again. That was, when was the fracking campaign at its height? Was 2014, 2015, I guess, something like that. Maybe we'll see whether people have the ability to have that kind of motivation. But it'd be very foolish if they don't. But it's got to be done at a local level. That's really the key thing here.
I think that's a good point that you make, Mike. Now that I think about it, we also had a very successful campaign to stop. Weirdly enough, around the same time, the whole fracking thing yet kind of came to a grinding halt. There's a lot of gas, I believe, under the sort of center of South Africa in what's known as the Karoo. It's a very dry part of the country. And there was huge discussions about fracking there. I think the Shell, they wanted to build massive fracking infrastructure. And I think the whole thing basically came to a complete stop because the campaigns against it were so effective. I've mentioned before one of our civil rights organizations here called AfriForum. They go and fix roads and things like that, and then they invoice the government. They were instrumental in stopping a lot of these fracking attempts. So yeah, I think you're right. That's my point. I think you're right. I think it can be done. There just has to be enough support for it, and enough interest in it.
Well, I mean, that's the key thing, as I say, is to keep the campaigns local, because if there's a national campaign gets established, that will help manage the opposition, in my opinion. But if people stick with, well, this situation is happening on my doorstep, I don't want it in my backyard, to use that phrase, that is something which can motivate even people that otherwise wouldn't be getting involved in any form of activism.
I think that's it. I think it's always referred to as NIMBYism here, and people are rather sneering about NIMBYism. NIMBY is the acronym for...
Hold on, what's the word?
NIMBY, not in my backyard. NIMBY. So people are criticised for exhibiting NIMBYism in that they're supposed to see the greater good. And that is quite an extraordinary thing to do if there is a proposal to fundamentally destroy the environment that is immediately surrounding anyone. Why shouldn't people care about their backyard? Of course, the inference is that that people are saying, oh, just, it's fine, do it, but just don't do it here, which is, again, to way simplify the issue. I think going back to where we started with climate, environment, food, all that kind of thing, this, I hope, would appeal to a very broad church, because if we're told that climate change is putting pressure on our environment, putting pressure on our food system, and then some bright spark comes up with an idea to take over vast areas of virgin countryside in order to plonk a building that's going to demand huge quantities of electricity and water. And in order to make that, you're going to have to completely redo the infrastructure system, road network, in order to build it, and all this, that, and the other. There are very few people who would live in an environment that's going to have that done to it, who would think that overall, in the short term and the long term, that's a good idea. And I think that the only reason that there hasn't been any consistent or concerted effort to deal with this is I think that by and large, people have not really been aware of what's been going on. There are so many other issues out there that get pushed to the front of the queue and spoken about, but I think the lid is coming off, because I think there's been so much talk about artificial intelligence in particular in the mainstream that people are now starting to do at least some of the arithmetic and think, right, well, how is that happening? And where is it going to lead? So I would hope that Mike is absolutely right. And again, the local principle, but that's what I mean about NIMBYism. I would hope that it just stands to reason that these issues would be fought locally. And I think ultimately it will have to come down in certain situations to direct action, to actually physically stopping work from going ahead. Because I think
another group of grannies being classed as terrorists.
Yeah, absolutely they would be. Yeah. But the thing is that all of this is precedent setting. And so that's why I think it's incredibly powerful. You know, if there is a group that successfully fights off the planned build of a data center, that would absolutely, I think, have the potential to fundamentally change the situation. And I think that's what people need to be looking at.
I like the idea that it's localized, though, because that just shows the power of decentralization, which is an ongoing theme in a lot of my discussions, Mike. So I take that with great joy. But listen to this. So I've never heard the word NIMBY or NIMBYism before. This is the first time I've ever heard it. So while you were talking, I quickly looked it up. Do you know that there is a counter word to it also, Charles?
I did not. Go on.
YIMBY or YIMBYism. And YIMBY stands for yes in my backyard. and it's typically, so in other words, YIMBYs typically advocate for increased density and urban growth to lower costs and improve infrastructure.
How many of them are there?
No, I don't know. I just looked it up.
Don't believe everything you read, Jerm.
Well, same as Mensa, there's also the opposite to the Mensa movement called Densa. It's the 98% of the dumbest people in the world, which I find myself very proudly a member of. But listen, we're coming in for a landing. The moral of the story is that continue buying your ICE vehicles and don't worry too much about saving Earth, because your battery is probably going to be more dangerous to the environment anyway.
No, I'm just gonna challenge you a little bit on that. Don't continue buying your ICE vehicles. Keep the ICE vehicle you've got running. Would be what I would suggest is the best thing to do, because if you buy a new ICE vehicle, it still has all the same driver aids that the electric vehicles do. So you don't want to do that. You want to be maintaining the one you've got.
Yeah, and before anyone
That's a fair point.
wonders if a new technology has been invented, ICE is internal combustion engine, which I don't think ICE is really used in the UK to describe that, is it, Mike?
It's not common, but it is used.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Isn't it?
I hadn't really heard that.
Are you saying the term ICE? You haven't? Is it not? Is it not
no, no, I don't. Well, not in the circles I move in. No.
What do they call it? Do they just say a petrol car?
Just call it an internal combustion engine.
We just call it a car.
Or a car.
I mean, this is the thing. We've all.
Well played.
Yeah, but this is it. We've been convinced that something different. You know, it's just another reinvention. This all these same words. You know, whether it's mouse or RAM or tablet or everything is just all these words are repurposed. It's not right. Anyway, so yeah, carry on with your car. All right. The same car.
Guys, I'll catch up with you next week.
Thank you for watching to the end of this video. If you got value from it, consider joining as a channel member, which directly supports what we do here. The link is right below. And if you're hungry for more, here are 2 more videos for you, and we'll see you in the next one.